Formula E, a motorsport category that gets a lot of stick, particularly from Formula 1 fans. For me though, I think that most people have written off Formula E way too soon, and as the category progresses into its now 7th season, I thought I'd put my case forward as to why Formula 1 fans should give Formula E a chance. Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. Now before we get into this video, I must clarify, I wouldn't describe myself as a die-hard Formula E fan. I tune into some of the races and I know most of the drivers and teams, but I wouldn't be too upset if I miss a race here and there. In this video though, I'm going to look at the 3 key reasons why I think you should give Formula E a chance if you haven't already, or give the sport another chance if you haven't tuned in for a while. If you enjoy this video then please leave it a like and hit that subscribe button for more videos like this one in the future. Electric is the future. The first point to discuss is the fact that electric cars are the future, particularly regarding normal road cars that we will use day to day, with around 50% of current drivers saying that their next car purchase is likely to be an electric one, and governments around the world banning the sale of petrol and diesel cars in the next few years. For example, here in the UK, that ban is due to come in by 2030. So whether you like it or not, road cars at least are heading towards being electric and away from being powered by petrol or diesel. Now why is this relevant? Well, Formula 1 has always been the pinnacle of motorsport, and huge amounts of innovation have come through the sport and into road cars that we see today. From active suspension that originated in Formula 1 to semi-automatic gearboxes, and then even the efficiency games that have been learned from Formula 1 pit stops are now used in hospitals to save lives. The innovations seen in Formula 1 have absolutely made a difference to real-world cars and other real-world environments. Today though, Formula 1 cars use turbo hybrid power units and have some of the most efficient energy recovery systems of any car, with the MGU-K and MGU-H. It's definitely the case that these energy recovery systems will be used in hybrid cars and electric cars of the future. However, as much as there are hybrid engines in place in normal road cars today, the future is heading towards electric. And whilst Formula 1 could try hydrogen fuel cell power units in the future, it's certainly more likely that the sport will have to follow in the footsteps of Formula E and go electric, which begs the question as to whether Formula 1 is still the cutting edge from a power unit perspective. For me, it's the first real reason to give Formula E a chance. The category's come on so much since its inaugural season in 2014, where the drivers had to switch cars mid-race to ensure that they had enough battery power to make it to the end. Once the Gen 2 cars were introduced for the 2018-19 season, the drivers were no longer required to make a pit stop to switch cars, as the new generation is more powerful and lasted the full length of the 45-minute plus 1 lap race. Then on top of this new generation could reach a top speed of 174 miles an hour, up from the 140 miles an hour of the first gen car. So they got more range from the batteries as well as more power, which are tangible improvements that are making their way into electric vehicles. So if there's any motorsport category that's advancing in a way that's going to make a material difference to road cars that we see in the future, it's got to be Formula E, which marks a significant change from when it was Formula 1, making those innovations. Not only this, but the Gen 3 cars which have been announced and will be introduced for 2022 offer even more power, have quicker charging, and better energy regeneration capabilities, all within a car that has a lighter battery, to the extent that pit stops could return, as a quick charge could be implemented mid-race. This would really push the boundaries of what can be expected of electric vehicles in the future. Perhaps the biggest challenge with EVs is the fact that the recharge time is so far beyond the time that it takes to refill a traditional petrol or diesel car. This innovation with Gen 3 could well make its way into road-going cars very soon, which would potentially revolutionise the perception of electric vehicles, provided the required infrastructure is built alongside it. And this is exactly the reason that those famous brands that are constantly rumoured to make the move into Formula 1 are all in Formula E already. The likes of Porsche, Audi and BMW all have teams in this category, as well as other familiar car manufacturers like Mercedes, Jaguar and Nissan. So if you weren't convinced already that electric vehicles are the future, then you just have to look at all these brands that are there and investing in the cutting edge battery technology. These guys all want to be there to learn as much as they can to ensure that their electric vehicles can be the best in the future. So if you want to see the future of road-going cars, you should tune into Formula E. as it's in that motorsport category that the future of electric motors is being pioneered. The racing is great, so there's no denying that there's a huge amount of innovation in Formula E cars, but this is not the only reason to tune in. Arguably the main reason to watch any form of motorsport is to see competitive racing, and there's no denying that Formula 1 has struggled over the last 7 years with only one team winning the championship. And whilst there have been close seasons, really before each F1 season in recent years, we've been quite confident that it'll be Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton taking home the championships. In Formula E though, it's completely different. Last season there were 11 races with 8 different winners from 5 different teams. So why is this the case? Well, for starters, you have the fact that a lot of the car parts are standard across all teams. However, whilst much of the chassis is specified by the regulations, there are now multiple providers of the motors and batteries, and each team has control over the software that they use to manage these parts. So Formula E isn't a pure spec series like Formula 2 or Formula 3 are, but the differences between the teams are pretty small. Take pre-season testing for example. The 24 cars were split by just 0.578 seconds. So just over half a second between all 24 drivers after the pre-season test. That's unbelievably close. In Formula 1's Bahrain pre-season test by comparison, the gap between the quickest time set by Red Bull and the slowest time set by the Haas team was 2.571 seconds. So basically the gap on the F1 grid was 2 seconds more than the Formula E equivalent. Now of course this was set on a different track, and in any case comparing times from testing is not a sensible thing to do, but you can see how close the FE grid is compared to the F1 grid just by looking at those times alone. Having a truly competitive championship up and down the grid is something that we haven't seen in Formula 1 for a very long time, perhaps ever. But by comparison in Formula E, there are often overtakes for the lead of the race on multiple occasions, despite the fact that the races are all hosted on street circuits, where overtaking can be challenging. A big part of this changing order is attack mode, which is where the drivers have to go off the racing line to gain a benefit in additional power. Each driver must use attack mode during the race, but taking advantage of the additional 35 kilowatts of power at a certain time can be beneficial over other drivers around you. So whilst you may lose out on track position, you can gain it back by making overtakes on the slower cars around you. Personally, I see attack mode as almost like pit stops in a Formula 1 race. You could try and use the undercut, where you take the attack mode early compared to your rivals, or try the overcut compared to the other cars around you. Plus, with attack mode, the number of times the drivers can use it and the amount of benefit it gives the driver is only determined 60 minutes before the start of the race. So it adds that last minute strategic element that just adds to the unpredictability of the sport. Yes, attack mode is an artificial element that changes the nature of the racing, but so is the fact that Formula 1 drivers are required to use 2 different tyre compounds during a race, thus mandating a pit stop. So you can easily see attack mode just as a strategic element in a Formula E race. It isn't the only artificial element in Formula E racing though, which is something that I'll take a look at a bit later. So Formula E racing is close. So close in fact that it's pretty unpredictable up and down the order. As such, there have been 5 champions in 6 years of Formula E racing, with only Jean-Eric Vergne taking multiple championships. Quite the difference when compared to Formula 1 over the same time period. The drivers. The final reason why I think you should give Formula E a chance is the drivers. There's a lot of talk saying that Formula E drivers are just Formula 1 rejects, and there's a fair amount of truth in this. However, FE drivers are still some of the best in the world, and you don't get to Formula E without some serious talent. Some ex-Formula 1 drivers have moved on to Formula E and have even struggled in the past. Take for example Felipe Massa, who was comfortably beaten by Venturi teammate Eduardo Mortara, or Jean-Eric Vergne, who early on in his Formula E career in the 2015-16 season was beaten by teammate Sam Bird. At the time, the Frenchman's future in the sport was hanging by a thread. It shows that Formula E racing is certainly not just a place for the rejected or retired Formula 1 drivers to go and relax in the swan song of their careers. It's a competitive young field and has some of the best racing talent outside of Formula 1, with drivers like Antonio Felix da Costa, Nick de Vries, and the aforementioned Sam Bird, all drivers who never competed in Formula 1, proving themselves on the Formula E grid right now. So whilst you might not be familiar with them right now, there are some seriously talented drivers on the grid, and it's worth tuning in for that. The bits I don't like as much. Now, whilst I've just sat here and said that you should probably give Formula E a chance, there are of course some elements to the category that I don't particularly like, and it's definitely worth mentioning them. For starters, fan boost. For context, fan boost is where 5 drivers on the grid get a 5 kilowatt boost during the race based on fan voting. The vote concludes a few minutes into the race, and the drivers get the boost during the latter stages. Now, I understand the intention of fan boost. It's all about getting more fan engagement in advance of the race. Plus, it's a way to get the teams and drivers to build up a social media following and get the backing from their fans. But for me, it's really gimmicky. I don't really think it makes a difference to the racing, and frankly I'd rather it wasn't a thing. I get it, and I understand why it's important to try something different, but it isn't for me. So that's my view on Formula E and why I think you should give it a chance if you haven't already. The innovation, the close nature of the racing and the drivers all make it a great motorsport category to watch, and it certainly has its own place alongside Formula 1. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one as to why you do or don't watch Formula E, so make sure to let me know that in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video and watched this far, then be sure to leave it a like and hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this one in the future.